Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. I've researched a number of chaplains, North and South, in my work around Civil War soldiers and profiling them. And mostly they remain chaplains during their war service. And perhaps no surprise, they were just as partisan before and during the war as anyone else. And with their position in the pulpit and their, in most cases, mastery of the English language, or at least having a great vocabulary, as befitted most preachers, they had the voice and they had the audience to spread the word of the politics of the moment. A few of them, transcended the role of chaplain and became fighting soldiers. And here's one of them, soldier pictured here, Nathan Gibbs Axtell. Let me tell you his story. He was a 33-year-old Methodist minister in Vermont when the war broke out. He promptly returned to his home state of New York and joined the 30th Infantry as a chaplain. And you can see his photograph was taken about this time. If you look closely, you will see that he has what appears to be a fairly standard captain's frock coat, which is the rank that a chaplain held. But notice his buttons, they're blackened. That was the designation for chaplains in the very early part of the war. A little bit later on in 1861, the War Department changed the rules, or the regulations is the better word, regulations for the chaplain's coat, to remove the insignia. And so they simply wore a frock coat with blackened buttons, no shoulder straps. So that gives you a sense that he is posed here in an early war look. So he served in this role until about October 1862, and that's the role of chaplain, doing all the services that you might expect. And that includes formal services of blessing the men, tending to the dead, reading rites, and a bunch of informal services like taking money, holding money for the men, sending it home, helping them to get supplies, make all kinds of connections. That changed in October 1862 when he left the 30th for a more active role. Something in him really wanted to be on the front lines. And so he did. He became a major, the major of the 142nd New York Infantry. His service with his new regiment ended almost before it got started in November of 1862, just a month into his service. He was in Falls Church, Virginia, which happens to be the next town over to where I am this evening. And he encountered the picket who asked for the password. And also, as befitted officers of rank who were mounted on horses, when they encountered a sentry, they were supposed to dismount and quietly give the password. Well, Axtell, perhaps because he was new to the job, or perhaps just didn't understand how the rules worked, he refused to dismount and he yelled, reportedly yelled the password out. This provoked an arrest on a couple charges and ultimately a court martial and dismissal from the service. All of this within a month of becoming major of the 142nd. Now, a certain politician stepped in and remitted his sentence. That certain politician, Abraham Lincoln. So the good chaplain, now the good major, had a second chance. He went on to fight admirably with a lot of enthusiasm, first in South Carolina and in Virginia with the Army of the James during the Overland Campaign in the spring of 1864. They were fighting along with the Army of the James on May 15th, 1864. Confederates beat the Army of the James, that's Major General Ben Butler's army, at the Battle of Drury's Bluff, effectively stopping that army in its advance on Richmond. Just days later, the rebels struck again at Warebottom Church, inflicting heavy losses on the boys in blue. The casualty list included Axtell. He suffered bullet wounds in his neck and thigh. According to reports, he remained on the field, refused to leave the field despite his injuries, and in command of 5 companies on the right of the regiment, he held the line against superior enemy forces until they were absolutely forced to withdraw, and they did so in good order. As it turns out, when he went back to get treatment from a surgeon at a makeshift hospital, the examination proved that the wounds looked much worse than they actually were. They were fairly minor, and he quickly healed and returned to command. Just a few months later at Chaffin's farm, he received his 3rd wound of the war, this time in the ankle. As a result of that 3rd wound, one source referred to him by what I guess you could say is his nom de guerre or war name, the famous fighting chaplain. Axel resigned before the end of the year and then came back in early 1865 as colonel of a newly formed regiment, the 192nd New York Infantry. But by the time the regiment took the field in April of 1865, the war was practically over, and it didn't see any action mustered out in August of 1865. At the very end of his tenure, Axtell landed on the wrong side of military law for a second time. This time, he was accused of improprieties involving bounty money. He led his own defense in a month-long trial that ultimately ended with his acquittal on all 40 charges. So Axtell returned to civilian life and ministered into congregations in New England and elsewhere. He lived a relatively long life, dying in Chicago in 1903 at age 75. So there you have the story of the famous fighting chaplain Nathan Gibbs Axtell of the Union Army. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.